All right. Hello. We are shooting in the morning actually. Yes. Why? Because I feel in the morning I feel really productive. I feel really excited. Um, I feel really good. Yes. And in the morning I have my brain is working really well and really productive. During the day, morning is kind of like the time is really productive, and I do want to take advantage of it. So that's why I'm recording. And this is the English session part 21 or 22. I don't know. I'm just today's date is 20. Sorry. Today's date is 12 February 2012. 12 February 2021. uh, Time is almost like morning 8 a.m. 8:15 or 8:30 maybe, but mostly in the morning. Yes. Right now we are talking about the lesson 4. Okay, I completed the lesson yesterday, and I want to record this thing in mornings, because in the morning I feel really good, and I just do want to record everything, because in the morning I have time, and yes. So right now we are talking about the lesson number 6, shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. What is exactly all those things, and what is exactly matters for you, and how should you change all those things? You do need to understand before you start your project, because it will improve your quality and it will improve your everything. So you do need to understand all those things. So first thing, let's just talk about the exposure triangle. What is exposure triangle? The exposure triangle is a well-known concept in a video and photography, and relate to how the three primary exposure control works with each other. In the general, you will use two of these setting, and the third will be detected by the camera. In the video time, the sensitivity are key exposure control, as we will see. Um, okay, what is exactly exposure triangle? I don't really know about exposure triangle. I don't really understand properly about the exposure triangle. But what I do understand about this thing is camera has such things like light, time, and sensitivity. They are You can control two things, but one thing is always remains uh, auto mode or camera itself. So you cannot control three of these things. Okay, what is light? Light means how much light is captured to the sensor, that is light. How much time required to capture those lights, and how much sensitivity for the camera for light and time. So it's kind of like a depend on each other. As I mentioned earlier, I don't really understand what is exactly exposure triangle, so I don't really properly say to this thing, but I will try understanding these things. Okay. Then we are talking about the shutter speed. Shutter speed is one part of the exposure triangle. Is control the amount of time that the time is allowed to expose the camera sensor. The camera shutter controls a duration of time that entering the camera and exposing to the sensor. The length of the time that the shutter will be open is known as shutter speed. If we need more light, the shutter will be open for the longer duration. If we need less light, the shutter will be open for less duration. Shutter speed are measured is measured and will appear in the setting as the second and fraction of the seconds. What is exactly I'm trying to say? What is exactly shutter speed? uh, what is exactly a shutter actually? You do need to understand there is a sensor, and in front of it it's a shutter speed. What is in front of it? Shutter. What is exactly a shutter? Shutter is allowing light enter to the sensor. Okay, that is called and how much light allow to the sensor, and how it will be break. It all depend on the shutter. Okay, so shutter priority is important. First thing, I don't really properly understand what is exactly mechanism happen inside the shutter speed and how does it change or not change. I don't really know, but is this thing is like when I'm trying to I'm trying to understand the perspective of the camera. Okay, when you are see something really longer period of time, you can expose too much light to the sensor, and the image will completely blown by white because too much light. Okay, so we need to maintain the proper light. We need to maintain the proper light to the sensor, and it is really important. Why? Because of that, when we have too much light, it will be image will be overexposed. If we have less light, then everything looks really dark. Okay, so how much time required for the shutter has to be open and close and capture the proper amount of light. Okay, so there are so many factors for this. Okay, mostly they have 30 seconds to 1 by 8,000 seconds, and 1 by 8,000, that means the fraction of the second. That means 8,000 is a part of 1 second, so it's like a really fast shutter. Okay, so how does it use, and what I should use this thing um, if you have to expose something and really longer period of time, and the subject will not exactly move, but it gives you really smooth transition. If you have really longer exposure, it will create some trail. Okay, what is a trail actually? When you are moving some sort of hand, you cannot see the trail. What is exactly trail? Trail is, that means some sort of blurriness. Okay, right now I'm recording at 1080 30 fps. That means your shutter speed will be 1 by 15, sorry, 1 by 16 shutter speed. So that means the this camera is actually recording everything in 1 by 68 1 by 60th shutter speed. That means 60 is the part of 1 second, so everything is recording in just fraction of seconds, so you cannot see so much blurriness. Everything looks really smooth according to the 30 fps. Okay, but when you have something really longer exposure like 1 second or 2 seconds, so that means the capturing image process takes almost like 2 seconds or 3 seconds. It depend on the how much time do we need for exposing that light. Okay, so when we are set up the shutter speed at 2 seconds, so while the image capturing, it will take 2 seconds to capture. Okay, and at that time nothing will be moved. If something is moving, then the light trail or some sort of footpath has to be captured in the image, and it is definitely not so good. It looks really blur, and it is not really focused. Yes, so you do need to understand when you are using shutter speed is a longer exposure shutter speed and less duration of shutter speed. When you are using, you do need to understand first, when everything looks happens really fast. Okay, like you are capturing a sports person, and sports person is moving really fast. So obviously at that period of time you do need to require a higher shutter speed. So higher shutter speed, that means I have to use like a 1 by 8000 shutter speed, it is good? No, no, no. If you are using 1 by 8000 shutter speed, yes, it will be capture absolutely fine, but it's like really dark image. Okay, you do need to understand, if you are using this, that means your subject is kind of like a really bright day, so that means some sort of light has to be captured. Okay, but this sports person, that sports thing happens in the night, and if you are using 1 by 8000 shutter speed, that means image become completely dark because it has a really less light to work with it. So you do need to understand what is exactly a shutter speed and when should I use this thing. Okay, 1 by 8000 shutter speed is kind of like a really fast shutter speed. Okay, so that means you can capture almost like the subject is moving almost like a 2000 kilometer per hour, so you can capture that image too in completely clear way. Okay, but if the sports person is not moving that fast, so you do need to understand, you do need to wait for the particular period and set the shutter speed. I'm recommending is like that 1 by 500 shutter speed is kind of like a really good, is good amount of light create on the camera sensor, and you can capture almost everything. It is not looks really blur, and it's everything looks really smooth, and no trails has to be happened. So it's gonna be really amazing. You do need to do something like that. Do not use auto mode. Okay, because yeah, if you are something really hurry situation, or if you don't know everything about how the camera works, then you are using auto mode and it's like a quick and go position for everything. But if you are using fully manual mode, so you do need to understand what is exactly shutter speed and when I'm using this shutter speed. Okay, 1 by 500 shutter speed is good, but it I'm not recommending this setting in the night, because when you are using this setting in the night, it is also be became really dark. Okay, so but it's depend on the situation, is how much light was there, how much not light was there. Okay, so it's all depend upon your thing. Okay, so there are many more shutter speed like 1 by 4 to 1 by 8, 1 by 15, 1 by 30, 1 by 60, 1 by 25, 1 by 250, 1 by 500, 1 by 1000, and so on, close to 1 by 8000. There are so many shutter speed, and most of the time it will be really a higher shutter speed according to the advanced camera. Okay, but there is a one thing. Okay, when you are recording a video, okay, or a video or some sort of, so always use shutter speed as a twice of your frame rate. Okay, why I'm saying this thing, because of that it's kind of like a really standard. Yeah, you cannot mess with the shutter speed at all during the video. Why? Because of that, uh, in the video actually they are all depend on the frame rates. Okay, and frame rates are all depend on the camera sensor. Okay, so if you are messing with the shutter speed, it will definitely not so good on the footage. So you do need to understand, you are using twice of your frame rate because it looks really good and it looks really natural. If I am using 24 fps, that means my shutter speed will be 1 by 50, or yes, 1 by 50 is available here. If I'm using 30 fps, that means my shutter speed will be 1 by 60. Okay, if I'm using 60 fps, my shutter speed will be 1 by 25. Okay, so you do need to double your shutter speed, and it is mostly shutter speed is always being automated when you are using video mode. But some sort of camera is kind of like a really advanced, that you can also mess with the shutter speed in the video too. But I'm not recommending this thing. It's kind of like a creative stuff when you are using, when you know everything about the shutter speed and how things gonna work out or not, then you are kind of like a missing this thing, because you know everything about the shutter speed and subject is kind of like a happening everything according to the shutter speed. So this is kind of like a creative stuff. Okay. Um, but do not mess with this thing unless you are not a creator, or unless you are not kind of like a knowing everything about the shutter speed. Okay. So for the starter, you do need to be for the video always be twice of your frame rate. Okay, because it looks really natural and it looks really smooth to your footage. uh, how function of second may also appear in the camera is 2, 4, 8, 15, 30, 60, 125, 50. How seconds will you appear? Okay, there are some sort of setting is appear in different camera. Okay. 1 by 4th, 1 by 8 is actually a standard form of the shutter speed. It's kind of like the number is already printed already in on your camera setting, but some of the camera is kind of like a different, use some sort of setting. So you do need to use proper setting. Like most of the camera has some sort of shutter speed is appear like a 2, 4, 8, 15. They cannot appear like a 1 by 4, 1 by 15, 1 by 16. No, it is appear in 2, 4, 8, 15, 13, 125, 500 to 10,000. Yes. And mostly shutter speed is also appear on the seconds is like 1 and some sort of 1 and 2 comma on the 2 comma on the left side, top left side. Okay, you do need to understand 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's kind of like a seconds. Okay. So mostly these settings are looks really different in different camera. Like I'm using Canon, so Canon has like a 1 by 8, 1 by 16 to 1 by 15. Okay. But if I'm using Sony or Olympus, they have some sort of different kind of settings. So you need to understand how shutter works. Okay. Exactly, you do need to understand how shutter works. How shutter speed work on the phone or mirrorless. The focal plane shutter speed system takes up a lots of the space. Removing it means the devices like phone, mirrorless camera, and modern cine camera are smaller, but how they record the footage, uh, that is called progressive recording. Well, actually, shutter speed actually works. How shutter speed actually works is kind of like a technical term. Okay, is some sort of shutter speed is look like that. Okay, you are seeing something. These are some sort of circle actually, and if you have bigger circle, that means more light coming to the camera. That means you have shutter speed is a really less shutter speed. If you have some sort of medium shutter speed, that means you have 1 by 50 or 1 by 68 shutter speed. That's kind of like a really normal shutter speed. And okay. And then there is some sort of a small hole inside the camera shutter. It's kind of like a really higher shutter speed. It creates really less light to the camera sensor. So yeah, but this has actually happened in the camera DSLR, but most of the camera had doesn't have a shutter like those are cell phone and mirrorless camera doesn't have anything moving parts. So how this thing happens in there? Okay. So there is kind of like the progressive recording on the shutter speed. So what is exactly progressive recording? In the DSLR or mostly the camera have some sort of a mirror inside, yeah, in front of the sensor. So what is exactly doing when we are capturing? The mirror goes upside down, shutter will be open, sense the image and close the shutter. Okay. and the shutter in front of the mirror. So mirror is kind of like important for the viewfinder. Okay, when you are viewing something from the camera, so we do need some sort of mirror, so understanding what is exactly looking at. Okay, but in the mirrorless camera doesn't have some sort of mirror or some sort of shutter. So how do we mess this thing? How should we set all those things? Is actually a sensor. Yeah, it's kind to activate the sensor for the proper period of time and close the sensor and particular period of time. That is called the shutter speed. Why my phone is blink off? I don't really know. It's like kind of like feels like that. Ki my phone is getting really hang, but I'm kind of like really recording this thing. Okay, shutter speed should be double that your frame rate. I already told you shutter speed is always be double of your frame rate. Shutter speed will be used if we are shooting at the 24 fps, so that means 1 by 50th shutter speed. If you are using 30 fps, that means 1 by 16. 48 fps 1 by 100, 60 fps 1 by 25. Okay. Fast shutter speed are used for action and sports. To achieve video like this 1 by 100, will need to set your shutter speed very fast. This gives you fantastic feeling to the footage, and it and is great when there is a interest, when intense action on the screen. When you are using the fast shutter speed, yeah, fast shutter speed, I always told you when something happened really fast. Okay, like a sports and moving cars, or like yeah, so you do need to set the shutter speed at like a 1 by 100 or 1 by 125. Then you can capture proper amount of light, and everything not looks really blur and good really focus. So at that time you do need to wait and set the shutter speed at the fast shutter speed. That means 1 by 100 or 1 by 25. I'm not recommending that 1 by 1000. It's kind of like a really fast shutter speed. That means when you are using this fast shutter speed, that means light is not really looks so good, because image looks really darker. So yeah, shutter speed. When you are using a slow shutter speed can be used very effectively to convey a scene of dreamness and other worthy places. Slow shutter speed will leave a blur on the movement, giving the almost hallucination quality of the footage. I already told you, slow shutter speed is gives you kind of like a slow motion. Not the slow motion actually. Yes, slow shutter speed is. I'm not recommending if you are using a slow motion. So I'm suggesting set the frame rate at the higher. Set the frame rate is higher, almost like 60 or nice slow motions. Yeah, but I'm not recommending for the slow motion to set the shutter speed as a lower. Because of that, when you are doing something like that and when you are shooting at 24 fps and your shutter speed will be like a 1 by 12 or 1 by 16, that means some sort of blur and movement blur has to be happened on the footage. So I'm not recommending this thing. Yes, because slow motion has to be happen when you are high when you are recording at the higher frame rate. That means your shutter speed will be fast and it looks some sort of dreamy moment. Yes, but for the photography I do something like that. Yes, but slow shutter speed I'm not recommending these things. Yes, it's all depend upon you how you use your camera and what you gonna do something like this. So yes, then we are talking about the aperture. Aperture is the another key part of the exposure triangle. It controls the amount of light that the light can be exposed. The camera sensor aperture are expressed as a f number or f stop. Each lens will have the certain of the standard operation size. Not all the lenses have the same range of aperture. Your aperture range is displayed on the front of the lens like this. uh, okay, 1 raised to 2.8, 1 raised to 3.5 or 5.6. The lower the f-stop, these wider an aperture is, meaning more light reaches the camera sensor. Lens will display on the widest aperture available to you. Not all the lenses will have the same widest aperture. Lens with the very wide aperture has a known as a fast lens because they can be let so much light. What is exactly an aperture? Aperture, that means how much image has to be focused or not the focus. When you see something, a background is blur, okay, and this background blur is has to be happen when you have some sort of low aperture, okay. Low aperture, that means when you have 1 by 4 f. Actually, aperture has to be expressed as a f or f stop in the DSLR camera. Mostly cine camera has a t stop. It's kind of like a t stop is kind of like a really accurate meaning of t stop is kind of like a really accurate form of aperture value. Yes, but t stop, we don't really talk about t stop. It's kind of like a really higher level of f stop. So just be focused on the f stop. Mostly you are using DSLR camera, so DSLR camera has a f stop, and f stop means how much the image and background has to be blurred, okay, and how things gonna work, and how when the camera and particular section of the frame has to be focused and everything looks really blur, because when you are doing something like that, you are focusing a particular subject and it is kind of like it looks really good, and the audience will get attracted towards the focus when the subject is focused or not. So yes, okay. Actually, in the most of the camera, f value has to be determined like 1 raised to 4.8, okay, so that means 2.8 to 3.5 is kind of like the aperture value, okay. So yes, lens will display the widest aperture available to you. Not all the lenses with have the same widest aperture. Lens with very wide aperture are known as a fast lens because they can let so much amount of light. I don't really understand what is properly mechanism happen inside the aperture value, okay. But I do understand when you have a really lowest aperture value like 1 by 4, 1 by 2. So that means your the shutter is open really big, okay. And when you have something really higher aperture value, that means your shutter hole or iris, should I say, is kind of like a really small, okay. So you do need to understand, if you have big iris opening, that means the shallow depth of field, that means the background will be blur and subject will be on the focus, okay. If you have something iris is kind of like a really small, that means the camera sensor will sense the deep focus on everything, okay. So you do need to understand. Zoom lens offer have variable aperture. This means that when you are zoom in the aperture will uh, will change automatically. Like mostly the camera has depend on the aperture value has depend on the lens. What kind of lens are you using, and is this lens is good or not? So actually, when you are using a zoom camera, a zoom lens actually, so that means have some sort of variable, uh, some sort of variable lens aperture value. Okay. So if you are using a kit lens that 18 to 55 mm, so that means if you are using 18 mm, that means the f-stop will be 3.5. That's the minimum aperture value. And if you are zooming the subject, so that means the f value will be 5.6. Okay. So it will change automatically. You cannot set 55 mm for 3.5 f-stop, so it's kind of like it's not gonna happen. Okay, it's kind of like a mechanism. But if you are using prime camera, so it's not, because prime camera doesn't have a zoom, so it's like a fixed focal length and quickly focus and higher f-stop. That means really lower f-stop, so that means your image looks really good. So yes, so mostly I'm recommending using prime lens, because prime lens has a good quality, good lens quality. So yes, I'm recommending use prime lens, but yeah, most of the time some sort of things has to be happen in zoom. So also use some sort of zoom lens, but a variable f-stop. That means it's kind of like a depend, when you are using this thing you do know everything about that. Okay. What does f stand for? F in the f-stop stand for focal, as in the focal length on the lens, as f-stop is calculated by the focal length of the lens divided by the opening of the aperture. If you have 50 lens with the f2, aperture will divide as a 50 divided by the 2, that means 25 This means 25 is the actual size of the aperture opening. Now you will know where the f came from and what it means. Okay, don't really get so much about this f-stop and where it comes from and how should I, why should I know about this thing. Okay, because of that, important thing is that the capturing the image, how you can use this f-stop for your image looks really good or not. Okay, so it's all depend upon you. Don't get so much hectic about how the f-stop and how does it came, and it's kind of like a really complicated. If you are using these things a really longer period of time, you will definitely know about everything. But for the startup, you just let it go and just be focused on your image. Your content is important, because your content is king. And then there is t-stop. um, T-stop is a kind of like a transmission stop and the measure both of depth of focus and exposure. These are unique to the cine lens in standard lens, and lens is the aperture of the aperture, almost like a 2.8. Those not transmitted light with this aperture number of DOF. Uh, with the filming many different lenses, with the filming many different lenses are used for this reason. It is effective exposure is correct to t-stop lens have exact same amount of exposure across the lens and f-stop value. What is exactly a t-stop? Yeah, t-stop is kind of like a really exact value of the exposure, and it's listen, okay, t-stop actually it's using in the mostly higher production. Okay, and t-stop as some sort of cine lens have a t-stop. They don't have f-stop, they have t-stop. Okay. uh, I do want to know about this thing, because but I don't get this thing. Because of that, t-stop actually it's kind of like a really technical things. Okay, for the startup you don't get too much hectic about the t-stop and f-stop. Okay, it just, you are just one thing know about the f-stop. That means you have some sort of lower f-stop, that means 1.4 or 1.2. That means shallow depth of field, that means your background became blur. Okay. And if you are using higher f-stop or f9 f13, so that means everything is became really sharp. Okay, and a t-stop is actually happen exactly like that. But t-stop is kind of like the really exact number of the how much light has to be entered in the camera sensor, and what is exactly has to be f-stop for the image makes a really blur. So f-stop is t-stop is kind of like the for the really high-end professional. Actually, don't get too much excited about the t-stop. It's not gonna happen. And if you are not using t-stop at the time. Okay. So for this example, you do need to understand. Okay, you are seeing something like this. Okay, so this means like if your iris is open really bigger, that means your f-stop it will be 1/4. And if you are increasing continuously f to the f13 or f5.6, so that became your iris hole, it became really shorter. Okay, if you are using f-stop is really lower, that means your iris opening is kind of like a really bigger than the f13 or f9. Okay, on this case you have really shallow depth of field. That means everything you are seeing is have some blur, and you set the focus for the particular section of the frame. Okay, but if you are using f13 or f9, that means everything is gonna be focused, and so it doesn't give some sort of cinematic. So you do need to understand, use f really lower number, but but some sort of content is depend upon the deep focus. Okay, so I'm not it's kind of like a it's kind of like a creative stuff when you are using f value to the understanding your subjects to get much bigger. So yes, in actually inside your camera, inside your phone doesn't have lens, so that means you cannot set f value to the your cell phone, because in the cell phone actually they cannot have lens. Okay, and the aperture is kind of set by the lens. So yes, plane of focus. The plane of focus is the distance from the camera at which the sharpest focus is attained. Another word, it is where you choose to focus on the photo. Depth of field is extend from the point. Actually, when you are using the lower f-stop, that means you have some sort of plane to focus. Okay, so at that time you can choose which kind of frame has to be focused and which kind of frame has to be in blur. Okay, so is this thing happened when you are using at the lower f-stop, that means 1.4 or 1.2. What is exactly a shallow? Shallow depth of field has a blur out of focus, background and foreground. Depth of focus extend about 1/3 in the front and subject and 2/3 in the behind subject. Shallow depth of field can be used for the guide the viewer attention and its isolate the subject. Shallow depth of field, that means shallow depth of field, that means the camera is focusing 1/3 front and 2/3 behind. Okay, when you have shallow depth of field, that means if you are using lower f-stop. Okay, so if you have you have really lower f-stop, so that means you have to choose where to focus, and that focus has a particular section. Okay, so particular section or plane, that's called focus of plane. Okay, and when the things gonna blur out, that is called shallow depth of field. So it's like that. If you are setting the subject and you do need to focus for the subject, so you do need to understand 1/3 of the subject will be focused and 2/3 behind the subject will be focused, and everything looks really blur. Okay, so you do need to understand for this thing. Then there is a deep focus. Deep depth of field has to be sharpest throughout the entire photo, that extend from the foreground to the background. Everything appears sharp. This is used for often landscape establishing shot, generally to help keeping the focus. Deep focus is kind of like the everything is in focus, and deep focus has to use is like a establish or landscape, all those things. Okay, because in this thing everything looks really focused. Then there is a focus racking. Focus racking is just simply changing the focus from one subject to another subject. That is called focus racking. Okay, But you do need to understand while you are using this focus tracking, you are setting the focus from one to another subject. So you set the distance from one subject to another subject. You cannot set the subject is kind of like a really closer one to another, so you cannot use these focus tracking things. Okay, so you do need to understand when your subject is kind of like a really far away from another subject, so you do need to set the focus tracking. You are setting the focus from one subject to another subject. Then we are talking about the ISO. What is exactly ISO? ISO controls how sensitive to the light camera sensor. It's increasing the ISO means the camera sensor need to be less light to get correct exposure. ISO plays an important role in a video as you can restricted by the shutter speed and aperture depend upon the available light. How ISO appear in the camera? Actually, ISO it means how much need to be exposed your frame. Okay, so that is called ISO. When you are using a really higher ISO, that means image will be get really overexposed. If you are using a really lower ISO, that means your image looks really darker. Okay, and mostly the ISO is appear as 50, 100, 200, 400, 800, 16, 32,000, 6,400, then 12,800 and 25,600. But if you are using higher ISO, that means you are introducing a noise. And what is noise? Some sort of noise has to be happened in the frame, and that looks not good. Okay, so yes. So next point is yeah, definitely noise in the background is the interference. When you are increasing the ISO, we are increasing a sensitive of the electronic sensor to the light. This increase became more visual to the same way that you are turn up the microphone, it will pick up hiss or stereo sound will be some disturb. You do need to understand when you are using a higher ISO, that means if you are using a really higher light and camera sensitivity will be really sensible for the really shorter duration of the light too. So at that time your frame will introduce some sort of noise and grain. So do not use higher ISO because it will not really good. Okay, uh, and then there is a stops. Okay, what is the stops in photography? I do tell you about the photography. If you are using this scale, okay, that means you do know, you will understand there is a scale for a 0, -1, -2 and +1, +2. That means if you are setting for the -1, -2, that means your image goes really darker, and if you are using +1, +2, that means your image would get really overexposed. So you do need to set for almost like a 0, that means like a really perfect exposure for the image. Okay, so that's all this thing. So how does it looks? Is it I'm kind of like a really excited to see everything about this lecture, and I feel really good to understand this thing. And in the morning I am kind of like a really excited and really enthusiastic while I'm telling this thing because when I'm recording everything in the even in the noon is actually not gonna look, because my intensity was getting really low on that situation, and I feel I am not really record properly. So right now each and every morning we are recording English session because it will improve my quality of English, and it will improve my career also. So I will definitely do that because it's a kind of like a really productive work in the morning, and it will change my skills and quality too. Okay, so right now I'm completing this lesson number 6. We are exactly finishing the subject about the shutter speed, aperture and ISO. So if you are watching this thing, it's not gonna learning thing, because important thing is that when you are messing with your camera, when you are doing doing something with your camera, is actually a learning. You cannot sit and understand me, because I'm not telling you everything about this thing, because you know exactly what to do and what not to do. I'm just learning. I'm just telling the things about inside the camera. Important thing is that how you use your camera and how you make your footage looks really good or not. Okay, it's all depend upon you. So I'm telling you, just go out and set your camera and do whatever you want, because it's all depend upon you. If you want to be filmmaker, you just go and shoot everything what you have, because that is the most important thing. Okay, so right now this is it. This is the end. We will meet you tomorrow. Okay, thank you.